Hello, everybody. Officially welcome. Welcome, Mike, from the UK. Welcome to New Zealand and Australia. We've got you here today with Leading and Transforming with Outcomes. And also you've just published your second edition of Agendashift. And it seems that lots of things have happened since you wrote the first edition. So we are curious to find out what that is. As we know, the meetup will be quite interactive, participative. I've never been bored in any of Mike's meetups. It's not just a talk. So be prepared to go into breakout rooms today and mingle with other people. If you don't feel so confident to have all this interaction, feel free to stay in the main room with Mike and we will just lead you through in the main room. In the recording, the only place that will be visible, I think, is the main room, not the breakout rooms. And also welcoming the Australian meetups with Dan. Dan, do you want to?
Yeah, g'day everyone. And particularly, I don't know that we have any people from Sydney online today, but definitely the folks through the Melbourne meetup group. Yeah, welcome back again. And it's good to see some familiar faces. Thanks, Silke. And
over to Mike.
Great. Well, fantastic to be here. Great to be in New Zealand by the power of Zoom. I've never actually been to New Zealand in person. I've been to Australia once. It was actually my very first business trip was to Sydney. Yeah, we stayed out at Manly Beach and we hung out at the rocks during our time off. Had a really great time. So Mike Burrows, author of these three books. I guess Kanban from the Inside, still a well-known book. I think I can call it a Lean Agile classic now. It's actually mentioned in Wikipedia, so that's going to be worth something. I published the first edition of Agendashift in 2018. In fact, if you go back to some early drafts I put on LeanPub, I mean, you could argue 2017, but the first decent draft or first decent edition of Agendashift was 2018. That's 3 years ago, but to me it feels like an absolute age. You know, just as Silke was saying, I mean, so much has happened, you know, in that time. And one of those things, of course, was the Right to Left book. So Right to Left, the Digital Leader's Guide to Lean and Agile. And what that book was a very outcome-oriented, or still is, a very outcome-oriented view of the Lean Agile landscape. And it actually really changes the way you look at some of the frameworks. So do you look at Scrum, for example, as a framework for plowing through backlogs, or do you look at Scrum as a framework for pursuing shared objectives goal by goal? I mean, depending on whether you look at things from like the backlog rightwards or from your end goal, from needs being met and so on, and working backwards, has a really fundamental effect on how you understand the frameworks. And there's a message there also of what we could call pluralism. You know, it's not about choosing a framework. It's about seeing how these different things meet different needs for different people in the process and how you make them work together. So Scrum and Kanban and design thinking and Lean Startup, not, you know, you don't have to choose one, you know, choose just one. So the Agendashift second edition published this year, published in March. Unlike the Right to Left, I have no plans whatever for an audiobook. So don't hang on wondering when I'm going to produce an audiobook for Agendashift. No plans to do that at all. If you are a fan of audiobooks, then there is one for Right to Left. So let's get properly started. And start with a sort of challenge of change. If you're like me, you're very tired of watching people trying to upgrade your organization like they're upgrading your email server. You know what I mean? You know what I mean by that? You know, choose a solution, choose a framework, you know, based on features and benefits, sell it to people, and then roll it out. You know, either dealing with what they call resistance to change or just doing it anyway. You know, and they're getting to the end of that process, recognizing actually that was pretty painful, and also it really did not fulfill all the promises that you were told at the beginning. For certain kinds of problems, certain kinds of challenges, that sort of, left to right waterfall style of change management, can be perfectly appropriate. But for changes where you actually need people's engagement, where you need people's creativity, where you need collaboration, where you need innovation, where you need engagement, then they've got it completely backwards. And I just wish the change management industry would recognize for these kinds of challenges that resistance to change isn't something to be overcome. It's a sign that perhaps you've gone about things completely the wrong way. And what we're doing with Agendashift is turning that completely around. We think they've got it backwards. And our big what if, our starting point is, what if we put agreement on outcomes ahead of solutions? What if we took that really seriously? So authentic agreement on outcomes meaningful to everyone in the room. And those people are people represented of everyone who's going to be impacted by that change, everyone whose engagement we're going to need, everyone whose innovation, creativity we're going to need, and on outcomes actually expressed in their words, not ours. So that begs a few questions. As I said, it sounds a really simple idea. Let's start with agreement on outcomes. And it is one of those beautifully simple ideas, but it is a complete change from those traditional models of managed change. So let's be honest about some of those challenges. So the first one is new kinds of conversation. Conversations about outcomes, conversation in the language of outcomes, the language of needs, obstacles, and outcomes is the way we do it in Agendashift. Now, for many organizations, that's new. And how that works needs to be introduced to people, needs to be taught to people, needs to be modeled. First of all, probably by people external, but then also modeled by leaders as well. Then, the results of those conversations need to be organized somehow into something that looks like a coherent strategy. Now, there's a lot more to strategy, and there's a lot more to adaptive strategy than just organizing outcomes. But I'm going to talk a little bit today about that part of strategy. Actually, strategy goes across the whole of what we're doing. Strategy is about connecting together, where you would like to get to, the challenges that you face, the commitments that you're going to need, how you're going to measure progress, all those kind of things. We need to make sure that we have a coherent approach to all of that. And Agendashift actually provides a lot that's helpful there. So innovation at the edges, solutions emerging from the people closest to the problem. I've already said, when you want engagement, then there has to be room for creativity, innovation, from everyone who has the potential of being impacted by the kind of changes that you're making. And lastly, making sure that it works for everyone at every level. So the individuals whose engagement that you need, the teams that they belong to, and then working up through the organization. Business agility at every scale, making sure this whole thing is sustainable, it's self-sustaining, self-generating, so that you keep and the mechanisms for ensuring that, for keeping things going. If you've been close to continuous improvement, you all know what a challenge it can be to actually make that a sustainable process. I've seen continuous improvement initiatives fall flat in just a matter of weeks. I mean, a small number of weeks, because the people doing it didn't understand what it takes for it to be self-sustaining and self-generating and all the rest of it. So let's start at for the first one, new kinds of conversation. And you'll get a chance in a few minutes to practice this in a way that will be familiar to at least some of you. But I've made it. For those of you that done these exercises before, I have at least changed the challenge. So the conversation will be new, even if the style of conversation is something that you're practicing. And this is a good thing to practice. So new kinds of conversation. I'm going to start with my definition of done. This is one of my popular memes, shall we say. You can reference it at agendashift.com/done. So someone's need was met. and arguably the only definition of done you'll ever need. It's deliberately provocative. I mean, some people find it annoying, but in a helpful way. I think, but it's when I first put this on LinkedIn, I had something like 100 responses. So I could say in percentage terms, 95% of people get it. I annoy about 5%, and maybe there's 1% that just don't get it at all. But hopefully everyone here is part of the 95%. So whose need, what need, how might we meet it? How would we know when we have met it? And this is what outcome orientation is all about. It's actually starting from those kinds of questions and understanding what does it take to get there. So someone's need met, happy ending to a story, the world changed for someone in some meaningful way. Those are very informal, but that's actually very good definitions of what I mean by outcome. I mean, things that are meaningful to people, things meaningful to the people that we're serving, things meaningful to the people doing the work. So 10% more for 5% less is not my idea of an outcome. It actually helps to be concrete, helps to be specific about what needs you're meeting. And it really helps to frame them in ways that are meaningful to people. And actually what the Agendashift exercises do is make that a really natural process. So that definition of done's been around for quite a while. I haven't checked the date on that. I can't remember if I had that for the first edition, but it certainly features in right to left. So that's not new. What is much more new, and it's one of the several important reasons for writing the second edition of the book, is that the second edition is written in terms of patterns. And the idea of writing things in terms of patterns is that you stop seeing it as a linear thing. You do this, you do that, you do the other. But in terms of patterns that you can easily remember, in the case of this pattern, it applies at multiple scales. And the patterns combine with other patterns and so on. And it just makes the whole thing feel a lot more flexible, a lot less prescriptive and so on. I mean, that was always the intention right from the beginning, but we have found at last a way of making that really, really clear. So the I do pattern, so just someone, if you don't know how to read that pronunciation and terminology, I can't either, but it's pronounced I do. So the I do pattern, ideal, obstacles, outcomes, and it's a fundamental pattern to Agendashift, and it's a really useful pattern. And a good analogy is the GROW model. So the GROW model is a very common pattern for coaching. So goal, what's our goal? What's the current reality? What are our options? What's our way forward? And what's interesting about the GROW model is that it's a style of coaching conversation that's really trying to get you to the next commitment. And once you've got to that next commitment, in a way, that conversation doesn't matter anymore. What we've got is the important thing, the commitment. Now, the I do pattern isn't like that. The I do pattern is about helping us understand the landscape in which those commitments are going to be made. So we're not saying the GROW pattern, the GROW model, the GROW pattern is a bad model. What we're saying is that if you're doing anything strategic, you need to be able to step back and understand the landscape of obstacles and outcomes that those decisions are going to be made in. So ideal, that's typically a reflection on something. It's typically the reflection on something prepared by the facilitator, but it might not be. It might be our starting point might be an early part of a conversation. It might be something that we've harvested from something on the wall or whatever it might be. But a reflection that's usually contextualized by something. What's the department that we're talking about? What's the kind of time frame that we're talking about? And then we have a specific kind of conversation where we reflect on what the ideal or the ideal best for this would look like. Then obstacles. So what stops us achieving that ideal, and making sure they are real, relevant, and representative. And sometimes we do a separate exercise just to make sure that the obstacles really are real, relevant, and representative. If you try to have a good it's very hard to have a good conversation about an obstacle that is only in one person's imagination, not in everybody else's. that doesn't feel very relevant to people, doesn't feel like the most important thing that we could be talking about, isn't expressed in terms that most people would recognize. So we've learnt, again, another good improvement since the first edition. We've learnt that you have good conversations if you pay careful attention to how obstacles are framed. And I should come back to that a little later. And lasting outcomes, and they are generated in some way. So what this is a simple structure into which your favorite coaching tool can be plugged in. So we use it with the solutions focused miracle question. We use it with challenge mapping. And most famously, we use it with the clean language questions, or 8 of them, in a 15-minute photo, our clean language inspired coaching game. So that's the structure, very, very flexible. It could be, 3 or 4 quick questions, a leadership routine, 3 or 4 quick questions, and it's over in moments. It could be a coaching conversation that takes several minutes. It could be the structure for a workshop that lasts an hour or a day. It could be the structure, the engagement model now, the structure for a consulting engagement. So what does my client want to achieve? What would ideal look like for them? What's stopping that? And what outcomes can we sensibly get to? Very simple organization to a consulting engagement. I'll skip over the next slide. Where you start is a choice. Many of you will have seen the Agendashift True North before. Everyone able to work consistently at their ideal best. Individuals, teams, between teams, across the organization and beyond. Right conversations, right people, best possible moment, needs anticipated, met at just the right time. And what we've done here, we've tried to give you a flavor of what a really, when Lean and Agile are working well, this is a flavor of what it feels like. And people can reflect on it. And I've seen this being like an easy thing. Yeah, we get this, this is how we're beginning to think. Or I've had it actually been a cathartic experience. Even in an organization, it was a well-known, I won't say name it, but a well-known non-profit with a very noble purpose that people bought into, but their ways of working just weren't working for them. And the chance to reflect on this was for them an amazing experience, and they kept asking for more time, more time, more time. So what I've done here is taken sort of lean and agile ideas, things like collaboration, things like just in time, and I've tried to make the language as accessible as I possibly can. Not try to make it teachy, but to actually take the jargon out of it, make it as accessible as possible. So that's one starting point, Agendashift True North. Another starting point, reaching the right customers, meeting their strategic needs. I've just pulled a phrase out of something bigger from our outside-in strategy review, which you'll see a bit later. You could replace these things that I've provided with something that's meaningful to your team, to your organization. Some part of your mission or your vision statement, whatever it might be. We have an assessment tool, and it's an assessment tool that we've worked very hard to take the jargon out of it. And instead of it feeling like this is a checkbox exercise, and all it's doing is selling the assessors, the consultants' favorite best practices, you can instead think of each of the prompts of the assessment, and there are 42 prompts in the full assessment, as a potential starting point for reflection. And that's a very different way of using an assessment tool. So here we've got, we treat work as unfinished until we can confirm that customer needs are being met. So if you're serious about needs and outcomes, you will know what this means. If you're not serious about needs and outcomes, you might suddenly realize, well, actually, this is something that's going to be important to us. And from the 42 prompts of the assessment, you might then choose that one. And typically, groups choose sort of 3 to 5 prompts that they want to work on. So good assessments, they are exercises in trust building. They're opportunities to identify the obstacles that we face. And if we can talk openly and honestly about the obstacles that we face, that helps to build trust. And It also helps to build trust that we take such care not to be prescriptive in the prompts. If you're supposed to be assessing the organization, but actually all you are doing is selling your best practices, then that's not authentic. And people smell inauthenticity from a mile away, and it generates cynicism and so on. So if you're going to do an assessment, do it well, take it seriously, and see it as an opportunity, in fact, in trust building. And you will do a much better job, not only of designing the assessment tool, but also all the process that goes around it. And that's what we've done with Agendashift. A new exercise, this is new in the second edition, good obstacle, bad obstacle. I talked about obstacles being real, relevant, and representative. Choosing the wrong obstacle is very distracting, as Marcus Aurelius here pointed out, nearly 2,000 years ago. What stands in the way becomes the way. But we've turned this into actually a really powerful exercise. We do it in typical workshop. We'll do this exercise twice. It's really funny that people fall into the same traps time and time again. So, excuse me, coming up with obstacles that are actually really just solutions by stealth. Our obstacle is that we don't have a knowledge management system. And that was one of the very first obstacles I ever had in an Agendashift workshop. Obstacles that blame people, obstacles that sell theories or sell, it's obstacles that are so high level that people can't engage with them. So if you hear, for example, that your obstacle is lack of the agile mindset, that kind of ticks all the boxes for me. You're trying to sell a solution or a theory. The lack of language is a warning sign. Most people in the organization not only wouldn't understand what an agile mindset is, but the suggestion that they have a wrong mindset, that's going to help make them feel judged. So it's not a helpful starting point for a conversation. And we take this stuff really seriously. We really want to frame obstacles in ways that people will respond to. You're not embarrassed when people see them. And also, they lead to some great conversations when we're trying to turn them into outcomes. So the famous exercise, Agendashift, known as the gateway drug to clean language, or a gateway drug to clean language. That's thanks to this game, 15-minute photo. 8 of the clean language questions curated, and we built a game around it. From obstacles to outcomes in 15 minutes, and it really is that quick. You can turn a list of, say, 5 obstacles into 10, 20, 30, 40 outcomes in no time at all. Amazingly effective. And you teach a lot about how to ask good questions in that process. My ambition is pretty high here. I'm trying to change the discourse of the organization, trying to change, at least give them the opportunity, give them some of the skills to have better conversations about outcomes and recognize when they're talking about solutions before they've really considered what it is we want to achieve and what other alternatives might be out there for us. I'll skip over that side, and I think we will go straight to, we'll go now to our breakout. So how many people do we have here? 28.
28 at the moment, yeah.
Yeah, let's make that 5 breakout rooms.
Cool.
So look if you wouldn't mind.
Yep.
And what we'll do, I will, don't send people out just yet. I'm going to give you a bit of what you don't want to get to the breakout room with no idea what you're doing, and no reminder of the words and all these kinds of things. So if you, I've put this link out here. If you go to that link, you will see those same words on your browser. You can put this on your phone or on the main computer or whatever. So give you a moment to find that. Can you just, a few of you, or those of you that I can see, can you just give me a quick thumbs up when you've successfully been able to open that? That's good. That's good. So just enjoy those words for a moment before I send you out. Reaching the right customers meeting their strategic needs, achieving results in the way to which we aspire. So reaching the right customers, meeting their strategic needs, that comes from our outside-in strategy review. And I've added to that achieving results in the way to which we aspire. I'm doing a little experiment here, I should say. I'll own up to that now. And we'll talk about that experiment when you come back from the first breakout. There'll be 3. Strategic needs. So there is in a way a bit of jargon there. Strategic needs, it's their needs, your strategy. So we're trying to identify which needs are the ones we should be responding to. So I'm going to give you 6 minutes in the first breakout. If I move on to the next slide, this is the ideal part of the reflection. The questions for you: when that's working at its ideal best for us, what's that like? That's actually the main question here, is what's that like? A follow-on question, if you've got time, some more sophisticated question: when that's happening, whose needs are we meeting? And what new stories could they tell? Stories where you've helped them overcome their struggles, whatever the struggles might be. Now, to see those questions, if you press the ideal button, that will take you to the ideal reflection. Again, another quick thumbs up that you've got the ideal questions in front of you. Good. Right, Silke, if you would send people out to their breakout rooms, if you should have at least 3 people, 4 or 5 would be better, but at least 3 people in your breakout room. I will stay back in the main room. I normally would not be part, so I should stress, I would not normally be part of one of these conversations. I really like this, that people having these conversations in their own words, not led by the facilitator. But for those of you that don't want to go out to a breakout room, we'll carry on a bit here. But the more of you that go to breakout rooms, honestly, the better.
Let's see what happens. And I'm actually not sure if I assign them automatically now. I think everybody will be sent out.
Yep.
And I think those that don't feel comfortable can come back if they want to. Let's see what happens. And then we can improve the next round.
Yep. So reaching the right customers, meeting their strategic needs, achieving results in the way to which we aspire, and when that's working at its ideal best for us, what's that like? And the stories bit as well, if you have time. So 6 minutes on that.
Cool. I'll send you now. Cool, you've made it back.
I made it back. Yeah, yeah.
I stayed here, probably as the facilitator.
So if you can give them 6 minutes in total, including whatever grace period you're set up for. Yeah. Oh, I see. It says remaining 59 minutes, but yeah. Do you have a timer going or something?
I don't. I actually looked for it, but what I can do. So 6 minutes. That's until 6:38. Well,
they've had half a minute. I'm going to stick a 5-minute timer on, and then yeah.
Right.
Do you have a grace period set? Will they come straight back?
What?
Will they come back straight away when you bring them back, or will they get a minute's warning or 30 seconds warning?
What I can do is just broadcast a message in there when we approach the 5 minutes or 6 minutes.
Okay. Yeah.
So, yeah. I looked at the watch at 6:32, so that would make it 6:38, and I think that's when you put the 5 minutes. So that's roughly. Maybe I'll give them send them a broadcast message at 35.
Yeah.
And then again, when it's just approaching a minute away.
Yeah. Okay. So as I was saying, I quite enjoy that I don't mediate these conversations. I send people out to the breakout rooms, and then they are having these conversations in their own words. Now they've got the they've got the initial challenge in front of them, and they've got some a couple of prompting questions to answer. But really, the conversation happens in its own words. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I prefer that style too. I prefer it. I think I've seen in other training classes and meetups that some people just didn't really like the interaction, but I also like your approach to kind of push that a little bit forward in the world, because, you know, that we've got so many talks and things, and that's nice too, but just spice it up a little bit with
how people talk in organizations is actually an important question, and that's one I'm paying attention to. So I make no apologies for pushing pushing that forward.
No, that's I love it. I personally love it. Totally. Totally my way.
I don't think I could do what I do just by lecturing. And I've developed a style that's almost the opposite. It's experience before explanation. Usually experience something, and then the interesting thoughts come in the reflection afterwards. Reflection on the experience. Excuse me. You connect that to theory. And so on. I mean, like with the feature ban and change ban games, I actually put experience before explanation in the facilitation notes. Don't start with a Kanban lecture before you play feature ban and change ban. You'll be looking at you'll be paying attention to the wrong things if you do. And there's some powerful takeaways from those games that you possibly wouldn't get if you were having a lecture that was, setting you up just to look for something, just to look out for, smoother flow or, better predictability or whatever. Well, okay. And the real outcome of people collaborating more is a much more profound learning from from those exercises. But it's much better when they discover it for themselves, rather than me telling them what it should be.
Right. I just sent at 35. I just sent a message to them. 3 minutes left.
So that's good.
I mean, for those that are just watching the recording and don't know Mike yet, he has written one of the most important books, I would say, in the Kanban world, Kanban from the Inside, and I really like it because it goes deep down into values and also has the best description of static. I think I've read it anywhere, because it's really going deep. And also he has developed the feature ban, change ban simulation, which we also use when at the beginning of the team Kanban practitioner. So the Kanban classes are also based on this experimentation first, and then go from the learnings. Yeah,
good. Yeah. So it's funny, I do so little in the Kanban space now, not because of anything against Kanban, but because I had my own thing to do. But yeah,
we still love you. We still love you, Mike.
Yeah, right, and it works both ways. The open sourcing feature ban was one of the best things I ever did. I know so many people around the world thanks to open sourcing that game.
Do you know the online version from Kaiten?
Yes. No, I linked to it from the feature ban page. We linked to that, and there's a feature ban, change ban channel in the Agendashift Slack as well. So that's a good place to get support for that and the various other versions. Yeah. No, I love all that. Yeah. So yeah.
The only thing I don't like in that online version is that it calculates it makes the charts for you and it calculates it everything. So there isn't that learning of doing that manually,
Yeah.
But still good. You can still take it as a learning. And I mean, just seeing the results is already a learning too.
Yes.
Should I take them back?
Yeah, you could. Yes.
Hello back, everybody.
Right there. Good to see you back. And let me share my screen again.
I'm going to see.
There was nobody in the main room apart from Mike and myself, and we just had a nice chat.
on record. Yeah, recorded. So you've answered this question: reaching the right customers, meeting their strategic needs, achieving the results in the way to which we aspire. And you asked, what's that like? Now I said I was doing a little experiment. So I mentioned that reaching the right customers, meeting their strategic needs, that comes from the outside-in strategy review tool. Outside-in strategy means starting from our relationship to the customer and our other relationships between us and the outside world, or the bits outside our bit of organization, outside our team, whatever the scope of the exercise is, and working in. So in the Agendashift outside-in strategy review, it's outside world, customer, organization, product, platform, teams. And we have a set of questions for each of those levels. Outside in is one way of doing it. Inside out is the other. So inside out strategy is starting with your capabilities and thinking about what happens when you improve those capabilities, address their deficiencies, and so on. And I tried to get a bit of both here and give you the chance to decide for yourselves what resonated with you, what were the main areas that you focus on. So just a quick poll, perhaps by chat. If you focused mainly on reaching the right customers, meeting their strategic needs, can you type in chat outside in? If you focused mainly on achieving results in the way to which we aspire, can you type inside out? Let's see in chat where people were. That's interesting. Yeah, that's quite a good split, actually. So this is the power of identifying these patterns and making sure that these patterns, you can plug things in and out with them. So what I found, around the time of the first edition of the book is that we could have a workshop that set up, we thought, for an inside-out conversation. One where we're very much focused on ways of working, an assessment tool that helps you find areas to look at in more detail and so on. And yet, some groups, or maybe even the whole workshop, will suddenly get very excited about a customer opportunity or an idea for a new product or a complete change of direction for the organization. And I went with that. I thought this is really exciting. But I also realized it would be good if we had the tools to encourage that to happen when we knew that's what we wanted. So we can use Agendashift in both an inside-out way or an outside-in way. And really all we're changing are these starting points for these ideal obstacles outcomes conversations. That by abstracting these simple patterns, we make it we make it more flexible. And it's great to see all the options that we have, all the things that we can change to design the experience we want to have with our clients. So we're going to move on from that ideal to the obstacles. And this is a really short, direct questions. So relative to that ideal conversation you just had, all those good things that you talked about in the ideal conversation, ask each other, what stops that? What gets in the way? I'll just say we ask those deliberately short, direct questions, because when we ask more elaborate questions, we get more elaborate obstacles, and they're not necessarily easy to work with. And we'll make this a shorter breakout this time, just 4 minutes. What stops that? What gets in the way? And you can click on the obstacles button in your thing if you want to see those questions. But they're easy to remember. What stops that? What gets in the way?
Cool. So I'll send people in the wait rooms again. And I have seen that some have actually joined. So we'll see what happens to them if they stay here or if they enter them.
So 4 minutes on what stops that? What gets in the way?
So until 47.
So what stops that? What gets in the way? So the funny thing with this one is that we went sort of full circle. Yeah, that's okay. We went sort of full circle on what the question should be. I used to ask just what stops that. And then I thought, well, that's a bit unsophisticated. And, you know, what would be the clean language way of asking that, you know, and you know, what obstacle might be in the way of that? You know, you're making as few assumptions as, you're not even assuming that there is an obstacle. But we found the more sophisticated the answer, the more sophisticated the obstacle. And then you start to get obstacles that are more theoretical. And you're getting away from real, relevant and representative. And even though we make we add a step now to actually make sure that obstacles are real, relevant and representative. We found that just asking the direct questions, what stops that, what gets in the way,
right,
actually it's actually better. Yeah. So if you get quick answers back rather than people sort of speculating. And when the obstacles are speculative or theoretical, people can easily say, well, I don't see that, or I don't believe that theory. And that's not the best basis then for a conversation. Instead of having a conversation about what the world would be like if that obstacle wasn't there, you're instead having a conversation about whether that obstacle is even real. That's not the conversation you want to be having. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's TRIZ, a liberating structure.
Yes, yes.
But similar, you know, where you are trying to create the worst case scenario in order to see how you can, you know, sometimes I actually find these unrealistic things that might happen not too bad if you facilitate it. You know, it's actually sometimes it's actually people have never thought about it and what impact their work actually has.
Yes, yes. I think that sort of the lesson of TRIZ is kind of a meta one in a way. It's just there's so many things that we think for the right reasons, and actually in the end help to undermine the whole process. You know, it's kind of helps to get a bit of a systems thinking going.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is good. Yes. But for sensible conversations, you want concrete obstacles that you can deal with, and not too fanciful, not too theoretical.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think TRIZ tends to.
For the, it probably depends again on the context as well, and what you want to achieve with.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, TRIZ is good. It's fun, which helps. And if you do TRIZ with a map of your process in front of you, for example, you can actually say where in the process things go wrong and so on. You know, if people step back, but also if people step back to the system that supports that system, then that's often where the interesting obstacles are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
What did we say? 40.
Yeah. I set the timer right at the beginning for 4 minutes, so I would give them a 1 minute warning now. Yeah.
I actually see now that it's a remaining 45 seconds.
Oh, okay, fine.
I'm not sure where that comes from.
I'm seeing remaining 55 minutes, but that's all right.
Ah, hang on.
This one can be short.
That's not this. That's actually the whole the Zoom meeting. Yes. Right. Okay. So when do we want to call them back?
Give them another minute, or you can tell them now there's another minute.
Oh dear. This is what multitasking does.
Yeah. I've become
talking to you, do all these things.
Yeah. I've become religious about setting timers now. Also, now I have a 1 minute grace period set to mine. So when I call people back, they have a minute to get back.
I'm just wondering if there is a time to set a timer in here. Way to set a timer.
30 seconds.
Now I've got my iPhone open too, so I can.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that anymore.
5. All right, you can bring them back.
Done.
Can you do me a cup of tea?
Oh, welcome back, and I'll share my screen once more. So if you click on the outcomes button, you will see these questions. Questions to ask each other: what would you like to have happen, and then what happens? And you can ask then what happens multiple times. What's happening here? So relative to those obstacles that you identified in the previous breakout, so you answered what stops that, what gets in the way, and what obstacles. What would you like to have happen is a way of turning obstacles into outcomes. And remember that 15-minute photo game, that was from obstacles to outcomes. That's what photo stands for. Then what happens, if you're starting with an outcome, you get another outcome. And you can ask it again and again. And what you get is a chain of outcomes that get more distant in time. They typically get a bit more abstract. You start to get to more aspirational things, to values, goals, those kinds of things. If you start small, if your first outcome is like the first thing you would notice when the obstacle is overcome or got round or ignored or whatever, and you can then ask them what happens a few times, and you'll get several. In the more elaborate versions of the game, we have several questions, so we can explore more of the landscape. But even just with what would you like to have happen, and then what happens, you can have a surprisingly interesting conversation. Now, again, you're only going to have 4 minutes for it, so you're going to need to be quick. But we'll see how many outcomes you can generate in 4 minutes. I'll set my timer. Silke can send people up.
Breakout rooms and timer at the same time here.
Ooh. I think someone was just about to ask me a question and then I left again, but never mind.
Ah, bummer.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have a round of questions after this, or even just listen to what they thought about it or something like that.
Yes.
I've seen that Arno just joined the meetup. You know, he's one of those. He really knew like Okaloa Flow Lab from the start.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, I was there when Patrick and Arlette had the idea for that. It was funny. We were playing Feature Band in Moscow, and they were in the back of the room, and I was like seeing light bulbs and explosions going off above their heads. So,
do you remember what year that was?
Oh, I would have been, I don't know, 2015, 2016.
Right.
I don't know.
A few years back. Wow. Yeah. And what happened since?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think at the beginning of COVID, everybody was like, sit back, it's gonna get over, we will be back again soon, and then realizing, no, we don't. So right, we need to
I genuinely didn't. I had 3 trips at the beginning of last year. I went to Florida, to India, to Denmark and Sweden. And I came back from Denmark and Sweden and quarantined myself voluntarily. This was before lockdown, and I spent a week. This is my studio. This was our double garage. We converted it into office and somewhere for us to sleep when our daughter's being looked after.
Nice.
And we did this 3 or 4 years ago, and it's the best thing we ever did. I mean, it's just so useful during during the pandemic. But I decided I wasn't going to wait for it to blow over, and thought I need to work out how to do what I do online, and stop the globe trotting, which was actually a win. But turned something that was very much an in-room workshop experience into something that worked effectively over Zoom. And I put a lot of thought into that, and we did a lot of experimentation, a lot of iterations. I went from 2-day workshops for the most part to workshops that were in units of 2 or 2.5 hours. Sometimes just one lot of 2.5 hours or 2 lots of 2.5 hours. So things have got a lot more granular now, which makes it more flexible. You can do things in different orders and so on. It's much harder to get solid amounts of time with people. And it's a bit, spending 2 hours spending 2 days in Zoom is brutal. We have done it, and we actually gave people the option of doing it spreading it over more days. But once people had the time booked in their diary, they wanted to to protect it. So yeah, we've all this stuff with breakout rooms and all the rest of it, making sure that people had some resources to look at while they're in their breakout rooms. Workbooks or Miro boards or whatever. All this takes time to prepare, but well worth it. I quite enjoyed it this way. Yeah.
Quite a lot of online stuff has really come out that, and I'm just realizing because I need to put them back because I'm part of the still very active in the European community. In New Zealand, it's pretty much an in-person thing still. So yeah. Well, I'll call them back.
Yeah.
I'm hearing some laughs here.
That's a good sign.
What's this?
The laugh is because of person interrupted.
Right.
I left the breakout room with someone clearly about to ask me a question as well. Apologies for that. Actually, before I share my screen again, just some quick feedback. What sort of things came out of those conversations? And did you find the structure helpful as well, or what did you do with that structure?
My initial reaction was, you've played a Jedi mind trick on us. And you've kind of taken us into a space where for me anyway, I've not quite been in this space. I've not got to this space this way before.
Yes, yeah, yes. It's funny. It does happen. I used to the first couple of times I did this, and people reported that they had some amazing insights they never had before. And then I started as the debrief. I would then ask, so did anybody have any new insights through that exercise? And then it was like a tumbleweed moment where no one was prepared to say anything. So I don't ask that question anymore. And instead I ask that, what's that like question? What's it like being the coach asking those questions? What's it like being the client answering those questions? What's it like being the scribe or the observer, seeing this going on, or writing these things down and so on? So we actually focus first on the experience rather than actually what's produced. And there are other exercises to work on what's produced. But we're getting people really to reflect on what actually happened there. And we're asking, the trick to all of this, with the 15-minute photo questions in particular, the clean language questions in particular, we're getting people to ask questions where you don't have the opportunity to insert your assumptions into those questions. It's putting the idea of asking open and non-binary questions on steroids. It really is. You start to, by practicing it explicitly, and you do it in a game. And again, games let you do things that are slightly uncomfortable and have fun doing it. You're training your brain to recognize when your questions are actually conveying your assumptions rather than actually genuinely asking a question to which you don't know the answer. A good example of that I have is my favorite clean language question, what kind of? So the little example I give, suppose I wanted to have a meeting with Silke next week, and Silke says, oh, I'm on holiday next week. The obvious question to ask might be, well, where are you going? And Silke says, oh, I'm decorating my house. My cat's having an operation. I'm not going anywhere. And where are you going was the wrong question to ask. I mean, that's a trivial example. No harm done. But just imagine asking instead, what kind of holiday? It makes no assumptions at all. It uses Silke's own words, the holiday bit, and then she can say as much or as little as she wants to about what's happening. And the answer may include where in the world she's going. Not that you can do that at the moment, or where in New Zealand she's going. but instead it'll be about what should be doing, what activities or whatever, or it might just be a very bland answer because, well, her holiday's her business, and that's how these questions work. It's minimizing the opportunity for you to impose your assumptions on the process. And what that then does, it allows the person you're talking to build a model in their mind about how their answers to their questions relate to each other. And if you, as the coach, treat that model as a precious thing, you give more space in the client's brain to build and maintain this model, and as we just heard, get to places that perhaps they hadn't been to before. And that's the power of this stuff. I'm conscious of the time. We're actually coming now to the top of the hour, and of those four points, we've really focused on new conversations, or new kinds of conversations. We could stop it there. We could just make it open or have a bit more feedbacky stuff, or I can just with a few more minutes take you through the rest. Before people disappear, I would like to mention that we are doing a workshop timed for, actually specifically timed for New Zealand, but for Asia, APAC in particular, in general. If I can put this in chat, it's just to get it done before people have to. So 6th and 7th of July for 2.5 hours. Is coaching with outcomes, and that's all the main the first half of Agendashift, essentially, all the stuff around these kinds of conversations, with the true north that you've seen, 15-minute photo of kickoff exercise celebration 5W, good obstacle, bad obstacle. You'll get to see the full version of the assessment. So a chance to practice with all of those tools, 6th and 7th of July. So quick commercial break there. So to everyone, and to Silke and Dan in particular, should we leave just open gallery mode like this, or should we go back to the slides, or what would you like to do?
How much time would be if we did the whole rest? Actually, I put the meetup for 1.5 hours, so we would
you did.
have some time.
Good. Fine. Okay, so we'll have about another 15 minutes of some slides. So the other sections do a lot faster than the first one. So the first one is the one where there's the opportunity for the exercises, and we'll probably have time at the end for some more Q&A and debrief and so on. So given that we have that time, any more feedback on those exercises that we've just done? The tool that we used, by the way, you can configure your own starting points, and there's various pre-canned ones that you can use as well. So if you keep that page open in your browsers and have a little poke about, and go back to the setup page, you'll see there's some other things that you can do with that. So it's a way to a tool you can use to help you through those ideal obstacles, outcomes, reflections. Right, so I will share my screen. All right, so let's move on from there. So that's new kinds of conversations done. So adaptive strategy is a big topic. We're just going to focus on the organizing the outcomes part of it. So organizing the results of the kinds of conversations that you've just had. Simplest way is with what we call plan on a page. So just organize outcomes into short-term, medium to long-term, and it really is that simple, but it works amazingly well. And what we found when we started doing this a few years ago now is that people started drawing some horizontal lines, tracing between working backwards from long-term outcomes, working back from their goals, their ambitions, their aspirations, and so on, and actually looking at where they would start or what they would prioritize in the short-term column if their long-term goal was whichever one it was. So with the exercise works with putting everything into the middle column and then moving them left or right until we've got a nice sort of balance to it, and then making sure that you can trace back. Our outside-in strategy review template takes that idea, and as well as that sort of horizontal thing in the outcome space, we've also visualized ideal obstacles, outcomes. There's places for it. And then there's a vertical dimension as well. So this is the outside in bit. So we ask a customer question, an organization question, a product question, a platform question, and a teams question. And you can build a workshop around those questions. So doing one question at a time, or doing those questions in groups with different exercises in between. Templates get a bit awkward when you want to get a lot of information onto them. And we have a lot of fun with sticky note based exercises. So there's option approach mapping, not its real name. It spoils the exercise to say what the real name of the exercise is. I have this mantra, experience before explanation. And this is one of those exercises where it's really important not to give the explanation until afterwards. Some exercises that's not true, but it's definitely true of this one. So we don't give its real name. It's easy enough to look it up. So I'll leave that. If you're really curious, you can do some investigation or find it in the book. Option relationship mapping, that's inspired by Wardley mapping. So Wardley mapping, you have a value chain going top to bottom, starting with a customer need at the top and all the different sort of components and capabilities that you'll need to support that customer need, and then a horizontal axis, which is about the maturity of those capabilities or components. And maturity according to a product life cycle. So starting from the genesis of a product idea right up to the thing is completely commoditized. So that was Wardley mapping. Option relationship mapping, we kind of do it in reverse. We take our outcomes and we organize them horizontally with the most ambiguous one, the one with the most uncertainty, where it's very unclear what the need is, let alone what the solution is. And on the right, the ones where it's very clear what the need is, and it's going to be a no-brainer deciding what the solution is going to be. String them out horizontally, and then stretch them vertically according to how visible the outcome is to the customer. So it's this idea of stretching things out in both dimensions. In the case of option relationship mapping, finding both edges, creating all the space on the whiteboard, in Miro or whatever, so that you can now draw relationships between things. Which outcome influences what other outcome? Option approach mapping, it's a similar idea. Let's find the corners and then see how things position relative to those corners. Pathway mapping, it looks like story mapping essentially. Spread things according to like where they are in the narrative across the top, stretch them down vertically according to what sequence we're likely to do them in. So what becomes before what? Having prioritization conversations, and prioritization conversations that force you to think about, well, what these things really mean. I love prioritization conversations for that reason. So that's the mapping part of Agendashift. This string of 3 exercises is the bulk of the mapping chapter. We do mention some other things as well, but that string of 3 exercises works really well. You can use any one of these exercises on its own. If you're going to do more than one, do them in the order that they're shown here. I've got some slides actually that shows you what option relationship mapping looks like. So solution ambiguity, across the middle, stretch them vertically according to how visible they are to the customer. And then here's an example from a public workshop. Draw arrows between outcomes, and you start to think, well, the low-hanging fruit is probably at the bottom, but the things that we aspire to is probably near the top. And let's turn that around. Given what our goal is, where should we start? And this kind of exercise really helps us to take a more strategic view of where we should focus our change efforts or our improvement efforts. So I'll leave adaptive strategy there. There's obviously a lot more to it than just visualization, but it's a big and fun topic. Innovation at the edges. So what we're doing here is looking at the innovation process, and we do this as a right to left thing, and starting with needs and outcomes and working backwards. So in terms of workshop exercises, change ban at the right, managing a portfolio of, not just managing a portfolio of experiments, but recognizing those moments of learning. And for the things that we rejected from the process, failed the experiments, if you like, what assumption did we make at the beginning that turned out not to be true? What about, did the process help us identify that quickly enough? Is the process asking the right questions? What have we learned about ourselves and our customer in that process? Change ban as a tool just for managing things day to day, and as a visualization of a process that asks the right questions at the right time. Working backwards from that, you need an ideation process. You need ways of choosing the right outcome, the next outcome that you're going to work on, coming up with some ideas, framing that as a hypothesis, turning that hypothesis into an experiment, and framing it in such a way that however it turns out, we're going to learn something. If it succeeds, we're going to learn something. If it fails, we're going to learn something, and we'll learn different things according to where in the process it fails. And then a really crucial thing, those outcomes, the ones we're going to work on, need to come from somewhere. The kind of continuous improvement where all we ever do is, each retrospective come up with a problem and try and solve it. That runs out of steam very quickly. And very quickly, you are optimizing not for anything interesting, you're optimizing for team comfort. All you're going to do is find problems that annoy you, and those are things that get attention. If you do the work to come up with some kind of strategy to guide your change work, to guide your improvement work, it has a much better chance of succeeding. It's not the only guarantee, it's not a guarantee of success, and it's not the only thing that you need. But if you don't have it, your improvement journey is a bit of a random walk. You will find things that may make things a little bit better. But if you don't decide where you're going to go, you're not going to get there. Yeah. So those strategic conversations that you need to have from time to time, and you need to refresh when it's clear that you're into diminishing returns. Very important to have those conversations. I think that's a big part of what gets missed in continuous improvement initiatives, why they run out of steam. The other reason they run out of steam is there's no accountability for learning. There's no regular forum in which you share what you learned. There's no expectation that there will be learning. And we need to put expectations on everybody, not just the people that came up with the idea, but even your most senior leaders need forums in which they share the learning. And we have some meeting designs that achieve that, the outside in service delivery review, as we used to call it. We're in the process of renaming that, but that's what it's called in the book. Another useful little pattern, just very quickly, 2MBM, meaning before metric, measure before method. And you can think of this as identifying two organizational dysfunctions. Putting the metric first is a dysfunction. If all you ask for is 10% more for 5% less, that is a recipe for dysfunction. You do need conversations about why this is important. And I've learned to be very skeptical of consultants, and I apologize, the Kanban community does this to an extent. I'm skeptical of when consultants say what you need to focus on is in this metric before they've had the conversations of understanding what people are trying to achieve. And before you identify the metric, make sure you're having meaningful conversations. And after you talk about them, and after you've identified the metric, you need to make it meaningful. We're going to improve lead time so that, without the so that, you're putting the metric itself on the pedestal, not the needs that you're going to meet by focusing on that. So meaning before metric. And another dysfunction is making some changes and only afterwards deciding by what criteria do you judge the success or failure of that change. So if you define your measures of success first, you're going to learn so much more in the process. And that's one way of helping you frame for learning. Also, the very act of identifying your measures of success may actually help lead you to solution ideas. So it's a bit of a sort of design thinking idea, if you like. You know, the more you put in the air before you come up with your solution ideas, the more diverse will be your solution ideas. And diverse solution ideas get mashed up, and you challenge the ideas until you come up with the idea that you're going to try first. Probably not a whole solution to the whole problem. You know, maybe just what the liberating structures guys would call a 15% solution. You know, that's 15% is good. You know, for interesting challenges, a 15% solution is good. You're making some progress if it works. So we use this pattern as part of the ideation process, and also as a way of avoiding some of the dysfunctions of change-related work. So that was innovation at the edges, and lastly, business agility at every scale. So I described Agendashift as the wholehearted, outcome-oriented engagement model. I'm not sure if I actually read those words out, but I probably said that on the slides. So what does an engagement model have to do? It has to help leaders of all kinds, managers, coaches, consultants, change agents, we sometimes call them, engage with the organization in the context of some change. You need staff engaged in that process, and you need to maintain the integrity of the organization as different teams move at different speeds, as inevitably they will. Two common denominators to that. The first of all is engagement, and the second is the organization itself. And we've paid a lot more attention in the second edition to the organization itself, and it's even in our mission. So we're in the business of building wholehearted and deliberately adaptive organizations. The wholehearted came out of the Right to Left book, and I'm careful not to define it too closely. It's actually most useful when people that's something you can reflect on. What if your organization was a more wholehearted organization, what would that be like? You know, you've got the beginning of an ideal obstacles outcomes conversation there, and that's actually really useful. The deliberately adaptive organization is rather more technical. It's more concrete. So up and down the deliberately adaptive organization, business agility at every scale, and you can look that up at deliberatelyadaptive.org to get a flavor, not the detail, but at least a flavor of what that's about. The detail, it's Agendashift plugged into the viable system model. Now, the viable system model, people do find a bit intimidating. But by plugging Agendashift into it, we've actually made it a lot more accessible. So if you're interested in the viable system model and you're interested in ways to make it more accessible to people, the last 2 chapters of the second edition might be a useful starting point for you. So this is kind of the 10,000-foot view of it. So adaptive strategy, we've already talked about. It's the process of strategy as well as how we actually word it. I mean, the wording of it is in the agenda for change. On the right, intentful knowledge discovery. So that's that process of experimentation, but guided by strategy, guided by intent. It's not just a random walk. On the left, mutual trust building. That's everything that we need to do to maintain integrity without compromising on flexibility, self-organization, and so on. So things like the assessment tool, how we socialize our experiments, our tools for health monitoring, or leaders recognizing obstacles, leaders being transparent about their goals and objectives. All of these are things that help to build trust in organizations. And in the middle, self-governing circles. I find it ironic that Agile talks a lot about autonomous teams, and yet strategy seems to be something that happens to teams rather than something they participate in. And we're helping teams to have strategic conversations themselves, to own their part of the strategy, and to negotiate that with the other teams around them, with the wider organization, and so on, and to increase participation at every level, but also between levels, 3 or more levels of organization participating in these strategy conversations. And it feels a lot less top down then. The idea of top down and bottom up kind of go away when you get enough people in the room and the conversations happen frequently enough and with the right level of quality. So who's invited? Well, the glib answer is everybody, but actually asking carefully about every one of these opportunities for conversations, who should be invited, is an important first step. And the question of who's invited, we ask it multiple times over the course of the book. I will leave that there. So authentic agreement on meaningful outcomes as our starting point, new kinds of conversation, adaptive strategy, innovation at the edges, business agility at every scale. That's the kind of things that Agendashift is about. I do encourage you to read the second edition. If you've read the first, you will find the second edition is a massive step forward on the first edition. And if you're a coach, if you're a leader interested in change, then the second edition is, I think actually, an important book in that field. We're getting recognition now, even from the academic OD community, which is really heartening. We've just launched the Agendashift Academy. So that's the vehicle for self-paced training as well as our interactive workshops. So do check that out. That slide's actually left over from a conference, but feel free to steal that discount code. It's valid until the end of the month, and it'll be valid for that thing I put into chat earlier. So this is the year not to be squandered. This is what 2021 is all about. Second edition is out. We've launched the Academy. Leading with Outcomes is the first of 3 self-paced trainings. Outside in Strategy with Outcomes, that is now in production. I've started recording. And then towards the end of the year, Transforming with Outcomes. That'll have all that organizational stuff, the deliberately adaptive organization, viable system model, a new assessment tool to go with that. Changeban actually fits into that. We used to do Changeban in our deep dive workshops, and that's going to be part of the Transforming with Outcomes stuff. And I shall leave it there. So just do remember that link I put into chat for that July workshop. I don't do workshops that early in the morning very often. So, once or twice a year. So do grab the opportunity while you can. And we have 9 minutes left.
And just a warning, my battery is going to an end, and for some reason my charger isn't working, but I think it'll make it through.
Okay.
There was a question from Moise in the chat. Can you elaborate a little more on the mappings, especially the first one, if possible, with a real world example?
Yeah, okay. So perhaps I should go back to those slides. Let me find the mapping slides. Right, so go back to the breakouts that you had earlier. So for the third breakout, you were asked, what would you like to have happen? And then what happens, then what happens? And hopefully the answers to those questions were, by some definition, they were outcomes, things that you would want, someone's need met, and so on. And we collect those. There may be a bit of tidying up involved, but typically we will have 15, 20, 25, 30 of those outcomes to organize. And there'll be, actually, if we use this one as an example, it's going to be quite hard to read, but take, for example, bottom right, blockers visible. And that may or may not be the kind of obstacle that you would, volunteer, very quickly. More likely, it was the assessment led to the realization that we don't make our blockers visible enough. And that leads to some other things. So that leads to blockers averted before they arise. So for blockers to be averted before they arise, we've increased our awareness not only of blockers, but the kinds of things that tend to lead to blockers, and we're more proactive in preventing them. And that's a bit more visible to the customer than blockers being visible. Blockers visible is visible to the team for the most part. Averting blockers before they arise means that the team, our customers now start to see us being more proactive, start to see that the process is less, it spends less time being blocked, for example. I can't read the next one at all, but delays from blockers reduced is right at the top. And that is definitely something that the customer will feel. So if you think about blockers visible, then what happens, then what happens, then what happens? And you get to things like delays from blockers reduced and things that are visible to the customer. So it's a bit like if you looked at design sprint, you might have come across challenge mapping. And the questions there are, why is that important? And what stops us? What stops us solving that? What stops us achieving that? And typically that's done with a facilitator, with a pad of stickies at the front of the room, asking the questions, deciding where the stickers are going to go, drawing the arrows and so on. In Agendashift, we prefer to make these things not moderated by the facilitator, but exercise that people can do in groups, because they're practicing doing these things. They're practicing having conversations that they can have without the facilitator being there. So they'll have a conversation about obstacles and outcomes. They'll separately learn how to organize them on the board. And visualizations like this work really well. So I'm looking at the thing here. We feel more supported by the wider organization. That's right down at the bottom, near the second from the left, right down at the bottom. So we feel more supported by the wider organization. Then what happens? Well, less internal frustration. Then what happens? More motivated team. Then what happens? More motivated team. And ultimately, happier customers by various indirect tangly routes. So what we've got here is a visualization of the landscape, and this visualization might be all you need, or you might turn it into something that looks a bit more, we call it a pathway map, that looks a bit more like a story map, and that's where you can have good prioritization conversations, deciding what becomes more before what should be the next one that we try, and so on. So I hope that's, what was the axes and dimensions again? So horizontally, it's ambiguity. So on the right, we've got the most concrete things. Block is visible, pretty concrete. On the left, we feel supported by the wider organization. Well, we haven't really defined what that means yet. Lots of ways, we haven't identified perhaps in what ways we feel unsupported, what support we are lacking, and so on. So there's quite a lot of ambiguity in that one. And we're stringing them across that dotted line first, and then we stretch them vertically according to how visible they are to the customer. So the ones most visible to the customer go at the top. So here we've got happier customers, customer referrals, engaged customers, delays from blockers reduced. And down at the bottom, we've got things like, we feel supported by the wider organization, blockers visible, and so on. Good.
Awesome.
3 minutes left.
Yes. How was everybody feeling in the breakout rooms? What was the as you went through the discussion, what